Welcome back, everybody. Really nice to see you all. I am here today with David Galef, editor of Vestal Review. How are you, David?
Pretty good. And while we're on the subject, you tell me how to pronounce your last name.
Oh, good question. Yes, I bet actually maybe other people are wondering that as well. It's Tuck, like tuck in your shirt.
Okay, good to know.
Yeah. So great. So welcome. Thanks so much for taking the time today. And thank you all for coming out. As always, if you have any questions, just go ahead and type them into the chat and I'll work them into the conversation with David. So let's jump right in. Tell us, Vestal Review is the longest lasting flash fiction magazine on the planet.
Well, that's what's advertised. I do think it has the virtue of being true, which is to say, it was started in 2000 by a guy who lived in Vestal, New York. So that's what he called it that way. Even after he moved, it's still Vestal Review. 22 years is a long time for not just a lit mag, but particularly a flash fiction lit mag. They're all over the place now. They weren't when he started. And in fact, apparently, I know because I got published in there early on. It existed in a hard copy as well as slowly an online presence. And I should have brought a copy, I'm sorry, but he would go to the post office at the appropriate, twice a year and spends quite some time mailing out, copies to people. On the website, we still maintain as complete an archive as possible. We go back that far, so.
And when you say he, is that Mark Budman, the original?
Mark Budman, yeah, who's still writing. His writing's quite good, but he's no longer associated with the magazine.
Okay, sure. And when did you come on board, and how did that all happen?
Yeah, sorry, my throat today.
No problem.
Vestal Review, as I say, I got published in there some years ago. I kept reading the magazine. I think it's a good idea to read the magazines in which you appear. And at one point he asked, sort of out of the blue, if I wanted to read some manuscripts. I said, sure. None of us has much spare time, but I can afford that. I forwarded my decisions, and I gather he liked it. So I was on his radar screen, and I was a reader. And when he'd had enough and was going to step down and asked, is anyone interested? I thought long and hard about it because I've been asked to fill editorial posts before. It's partly what I do for my job, which is I run a creative writing program. And I finally decided, yes, I'll do it. I can find the time somewhere. And I'm very glad I did. I'll stop at this point for you to have me another question. Unfortunately, I could go on and on.
No, it's great to know, because I think it's helpful for other people to see too how it starts, how people get involved with literary magazines. So do you have a sense of why he started why Flash, especially at a time when there weren't other Flash magazines?
Yeah, it's a good question. In fact, I know some of the history of Flash. I guess, I don't know, by now, maybe four or 5 years ago, I published a book, which at the time was one of the only in its field. It's called Brevity, a Flash fiction handbook, in which I traced the history of Flash. It has roots going back to antiquity. Mark identified Flash. I think it appealed to his sense of something quickly set up and dealt with. But in all fairness, Sudden Fiction, Shepard and Thomas, the original book that so many people point to, came out, I believe it was 86. And after that, there were people who did, there was Tom Hazuka, there were other Sudden Fiction books. I used to teach from Sudden Fiction International. There's a Sudden Fiction Latino now. There's a whole franchise. And as I'm sure you know, there are magazines all over. But you're quite correct. There weren't that many then. And I think it appealed to his sense of something new. I still like it. I still consider it in some ways. Well, every time I read a good story, I think this is new.
Sure. So just to define terms a little bit, can you tell us, is there a difference between sudden fiction, flash fiction,
yes.
microfiction, and some other terms that might be floating around?
As they say, I'm glad you asked me that. I mean, again, some of these distinctions are arbitrary, but when sudden fiction came out, the unofficial sort of definition or limit seemed to be about 6 pages in their anthology, which I count as about 1,500 words, which seems rather long to us today. Tom Hazuka's flash fiction made it shorter. There was, I'm blocking on the name now, let me see if I can find it. It was Jerome Stern, okay, microfiction, I think it was, pretty sure, which published, it's a very slim volume. My point is the history of flash fiction in the last 20 years has gotten shorter and shorter. I've been in correspondence with Ben White, who edits Nanoism. That, by the way, deals with the original length of a tweet, 140 characters. Many people don't realize that, and they write 140 words, or they write and they don't realize there are spaces to be counted. That's real art. I mean, I can quote some later on, but there's also hint fiction. I really wish there were another anthology of that, because that's 25 words or fewer.
Can you say that again? It's hint fiction?
Yeah, as in, let me give you a hint. Okay.
Right.
And, you know,
there's a 6-word memoir too, right?
I'm sorry, what?
The 6-word memoir.
Right, and 2-sentence horror stories. The possibilities are endless.
Right.
There may be a vanishing point. Lydia Davis once wrote a 1-word short story, Fish. It's evocative. I'll leave it at that.
Right. That's interesting.
Yeah.
So I noticed Vestal Review, the limit for your magazine is 500 words.
Right.
Can you talk about why 500? I think
sure.
It might seem like an arbitrary number, but I was actually reading some of the stories, and I just now was really struck by how much can be accomplished in 500 words. They didn't feel short. Yeah. They didn't feel abbreviated.
It's an excellent question. I mean, the simplest answer is this was the limit passed on by the previous editor. Okay. I liked it. I mean, I could have changed all sorts of things. I mean, one thing that has slowly changed is, and I'll get back to your question in a moment, is our contributing editors. Mandira, for example, is here, an excellent choice on our part. And I'd give a shout out to our other editors, okay, who work really hard. Okay, there's Mandira, as I say. There's let me find the list in alphabetical order, because I don't want to stint anyone. I apologize if I'm sometimes looking like this. I believe in preparation. So yeah, there's Jasmine Ledesma. There's Blaze Allison Kearsley. There's Chris Notarnicola, Phil Olson, and Lucy Zhang. There's also Angie Kang, our wonderful art director. The magazine wouldn't be possible without them. And among other duties, they read these 500 word stories. And it is amazing what you can get in there. Microfiction, I mean, I published it, I'm a fan of it, seems a little slender insofar as, you know, what you want to put into a few sentences now gets us to be a sentence. The arresting conclusion may be a phrase, and it depends on your definition. I mean, microfiction may be 350, maybe 250. Best microfiction, I think, expands a bit. 500 seems to work. I don't know how else to put it. Smoke Bomb Quarterly does longer. It's really what the editor decides works best, I think, for the magazine. So.
Have you heard writers ever express concern that writing a lot of flash fiction can be bad if you want to develop your skill for other kinds of writing? I've heard this sort of idea floating about, because if you want to like develop a novelist skill for, you know, setting, description, and digression, and other, you know, things unique to the novel, that writing a lot of flash fiction could actually hurt you in some way.
I have heard this. I mean, publishing a fair amount, and also I've published novels. Sorry, we're trying to find one thing that maybe later. I disagree, but I certainly understand where they're coming from. I would argue that the lessons brevity teaches putting it in a shorter space rather than longer, getting, the mot juste, whatever that mot is valuable for any kind of writing. It does make you perhaps impatient with, a Dickensian long description, like in the beginning of Hard Times, where Dickens describes Gradgrind with 17 different metaphors, talking about his bank vault of a head and his sort of balding features and how he thumps on the desk. It's great. I would say that's that kind of Baroque style is probably not for Flash, but there are exceptions to everything. I mean, we just accepted one piece that is quite Baroque. It goes like this. I mean, but it works. That's one thing you learn as an editor. Sure, you've got guidelines, and if you want later on, I'll tell you what we really look for. But I'm happy to be proved wrong. I feel the same in the classroom.
Sure. So you think there's flexibility that people can sort of go back and forth?
I'll tell you my own experience, which is, like so many of you, I'm sure, I'm working on a novel. I published 3. Guess what? The 4th one doesn't get any easier. I think because you set the bar higher. But in any event, Flash has taught me the importance of seeing more. Okay, because you've got to start something, a little arc and so forth. Mostly in editing, when you go back and you cut some of the wastage. But it's a different kind of writing, that's all. But one, I think, pollinates the other.
Sure. So this is like the $1 million question. What makes a great piece of Flash fiction?
That's the problem, is I would say plural pieces, because there's so many different directions. But at least for us, because again, the contributing editors all have their say, as they should. Mostly the beginning, a strong voice pulls me in, whether it's third person objective, whether it's first person, someone who is telling me something that I better listen to. Yeah, that strong voice is often built on really good imagery, okay, rather than the tired, worn out stuff, and a sense of scene. It dramatizes. It doesn't just describe. In about 2 sentences, I am there, okay, wherever that is. I'm watching the action. There's a dynamite closer, okay, which sort of snaps everything into perspective. And I go on about this, but I mean, it's sort of, I don't mean to be a cop-out, but it's sort of what Ford Maddox Ford, who edited, many decades ago, I think in some ways he was a little lazy, but he said, I can smell it. A piece comes in. He said this actually about a piece by D.H. Lawrence, The Odor of Chrysanthemums. He put your sense from the opening. This is a really strong piece, and it is.
Do you think the element of surprise is important in Flash?
I'm a little old-fashioned. This week in my intermediate fiction class, I'm teaching a section called Twists. It's not quite what you mean. There's all sorts of ways of surprising the reader. And it's also true, I tell my students, that twists are somewhat out of favor. This is not the era of O. Henry. Well, they all know Gifts of the Magi, that story where they cross each other up and giving gifts. I like the element of surprise. It may be a bit old-fashioned. It may be misdirectional. That is, hey, you cheated, you left something out. But I think there are different ways of elementing, of detailing what you mean by surprise. Here comes a narrative turn is only one way to do it. Here comes a character turn. You had no idea that, even as she was praising her partner, that she secretly despised him, or her, or them. All sorts of ways to go. Linguistic turns, okay, where there's an image and then another image and then something that doesn't quite belong and you want to reread. I mean, that's one element about surprise. It's too easy, I think, to read a flash fiction story. Sorry, I'm using my hands because I was told to defeat the talking head phenomenon Zoom, you've got to sort of go with this. Any event, you're reading along, you don't want the accusation, oh, okay, I read this, I get it. No,
Mhm.
good, even a good surprise, you want to reread to see, okay, what tipped you off there? All right. There's a really good paragraph long piece, speaking of micro, by Valenzuela called Vision Out of the Corner of One Eye, where a woman is riding a bus. It's somewhat famous, and it's in the handbook I published. And there's a guy who sort of starts, I mean, no sort of, starts molesting her. And she moves to another area of the bus. He won't stop. And I don't want to give away the story, but let's just say she gets even with him in not just one, but two interesting ways. And I'll leave it at that. Luisa Valenzuela,
Mhm.
Vision Out of the Corner of One Eye. It's translated from the Spanish, but it not only just demonstrate, I think, the surprise you're talking about in a narrative way.
Yeah, that's interesting because that's a kind of character arc that I would expect in a longer story.
There's a question, I mean, that you haven't asked, but you might, that is, how can you develop character in that small space? And again, you have time, I think, for a little arc. When I get a bit lit crit, because I mean, I also publish, literary criticism. It's what originally I was hired for in a previous job. Art is representation. It's not the thing itself. It's words on a page. Okay, fine. Flash fiction is radical representation. In other words, not just a long description of a face for which you have to build in the whole, but it just describes the person's nose. And you fill in the rest. It just describes the captivating way his eyes roam across the room. I'm sorry, I'm making this up and badly, but that's the idea.
Yeah, that's interesting. So you have to find like the one trait that's going to speak for the whole.
Yeah.
I think there's a term. Isn't there like some kind of literary term?
Well, synecdoche or metonymy, part for whole, sure. And I mean, usually people see it in what they regard as antique poetry, like, 40 prows crested the waves, i.e. 40 ships on the ocean. But you can do it with character. You can do it with a plot event, okay? You see the guy going to the liquor store, and you realize with the tip-off of a sentence that that's his afternoon trip. He also did it at 10 o'clock. He's going to do it later in the evening.
Yeah.
This is in life.
Yeah. There's one story in the most recent issue that many people should go look at the most recent issue. There's really a lot of outstanding work there. But the one that I'm thinking of right now, I forget the author's name and the title of the story, and I don't want to give away the twist, but the writer uses temperature throughout. That's like the motif of the cold and his relationship to the father. And you think the piece is sort of about the father.
It's a really short piece.
It's very short. And I was just really blown away by there was a surprise at the end, but it felt completely organic. It didn't feel like a gotcha, it didn't sneak up on you like that. But it's harrowing. It's because I think there's the imagery is so potent at the end there that it.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm looking to check because his memory. I'm older and memory's fallible. That brief story, what I get, it is in the latest issue.
I'll link to it in the write-up too as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
But it is. Oh, there's another one, by the way, Creation Colorado, which is all about.
I know. That one was great. There's some great work there. Yeah.
Well, I'll move on, but yeah, you can put the link in.
I'll link to these stories. So much there is lovely, but that to me, it just that kind of encapsulates an example of what can really work in Flash, where there's this like very, very strong, potent imagery, and it really catches you by. You think the story is going in one direction, and then it just goes.
I mean, the short answer to the reprise is yes, we love surprises. I'm also aware in terms of the construction of a piece. This is more from poetry that I got, and I can't remember now who said it. Was it Frost? Basically saying no surprise for the writer, no surprise for the reader. I get that. The writer should, also be exploring. I will say, though, however, that there are some stories I've talked with the authors. They knew exactly where they wanted to go and simply executed it superbly. I try, this is going to sound a little funny, but I try not to confuse process with result. That is, I don't care, and I mean that in a nice way, how the author got there. What I see is on the page. If the author said, I, tore it off in half an hour, I didn't know that. It looks extremely polished.
Right.
No, I'm a fan of everybody. If the author says, I sweated buckets over it, for 3 months, it's possible, dare I say it, that it could use another couple of months. So anyway.
Sure. And we have a question here. Thank you. How is Flash considered among traditional academic and literary communities? Is there controversy?
Yeah, and by the way, I might point out that even at MFA programs, it does not yet have, I think, the accolades it deserves. For academics, that is literature departments, they will recognize it more if you go way back when, like Aesop's Fables, okay? Or say Shonagon's The Pillow Book, okay? 13th century Japan, or Boccaccio's Decameron. These are tiny little stories which have a literary pedigree, all right? And so, academics can say, well, of course, he works in this small space. Not only do many have a sort of a blind spot for what's out there now, they don't really know what to make of it. Or if they do, they'll recognize one famous Flash fiction piece because it's on their radar screen. It's difficult for people, I think, to recognize all the good stuff out there, but it's out there. I don't think literature departments do enough with it.
Makes sense.
That said, I've been teaching Flash in my workshops and some of my say short story classes for years and years. So
great. What do you see a lot of since you're so enmeshed in the genre and you're teaching it, you're writing it and you're reading it as an editor, you've been reading it over many, many years. Is there stylistically and also maybe in terms of subject matter, are there things that you have seen a lot of that when you encounter, you're sort of like, okay, this is nice, but I've seen this 800 times.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost unfortunate because it usually has to do with content. I have seen, this is going to sound awful, and I probably should add, the sick child who may be, maybe an issue, the best friend betrayal, the marital dispute. But and I hasten to add, that doesn't mean you shouldn't try it again. There's a very annoying quotation by John Gardner, which I'll quote not to be annoying, but he says, there are only two plots in this world. We take a journey and a stranger comes to town. Now, I find that ridiculously reductive, but I take his point, which is there are only so many plots. And we're talking now, in my case, about this kind of thing I see over and over again, in which case I tell, certainly my students, I don't always tell, I tell would-be contributors, you might want to do something a little more, invest in character. Because the same plot is going to work out differently with a pregnant woman, okay, in, let's say, West Africa versus someone who's in New York and is affluent and. It's what you do with the plot. And if you can't just manage character, the details. Again, I tell my students, I tell them, maybe I'll forget your name next year, but I'll remember that piece you handed in last Thursday, where you described the ocean waves as little penguins with top hats. I just made that up. You should really rewrite that. But and they think, in the next session, when it's time for them to hand the piece, they may work on their imagery. That's really important, particularly in Flash. We could ask later on what the distinction is between prose poems and Flash. It's a vexed issue, and I have a chapter devoted to it. But imagery, I think, does a lot in no matter what you're writing. I have a poet friend. She's quite good. I'll quote her by name, Beth Ann Fenley, because she's also she came out with a book of micro Flash nonfiction, which is killer, and she's also started. That's what she's doing partly now. But when she was writing more poetry, and she and I used to teach alongside each other at the University of Mississippi, she said slyly, and it got under my skin, she said, David, haven't you ever noticed when you're criticizing a poet, you say, oh, this is kind of prosy. Whereas when you want to compliment a fiction writer, you say, how poetic. And she has a point. I tell my students to invest in metaphor. I tell them, you want to improve your fiction? Take a poetry workshop.
Are there, in addition to subjects that you see a lot, are there styles, like are there approaches to Flash that you see a lot? I imagine, I'm just guessing here, but I imagine like the long kind of run-on, breathless run-on sentence would be like a common approach. Are there things like that that you see a lot of that aren't necessarily, it's not necessarily bad, but it's just something
right? These are excellent questions. I don't want to heap coals on some authors. We do see a fair amount of breathless run-on, but we just accepted a really, really cool one. Why? The images were amazing. But yes, the other thing is, how can I put this? Sort of an unearned epiphany. That is, this person is staring out the window. She reviews past unsuccessful relationships. She goes over the faucet and something comes to her. There are some excellent stories that way. So again, I don't mean to dump on that, but I don't always buy it. Or for that matter, I love surreal type stuff. But how can I put this? I tend to shy away a bit from the wouldn't it be cool style of writing. I'm going to have her do this, I'm going to have her do that. And I think, no, she wouldn't. She wouldn't at all, surreal or not. And so I wanted to strain the limits of credibility, but only strain them. And I think there's some authors who just do whatever they want. That's their privilege. But to some extent, art, which is, etymologically related to artificial, art is, this is what Virginia Woolf said at one point. She said, art is order. And she's right. It can go all over the place, but in the end, you have confined something to 500 words. You're pursuing a pattern. That's the way it works. And some people find that what might be a restrictive pattern, that's the way to work. I mean, if someone tells you go write a poem, but if someone says, I want 14 lines, I want them in iambic pentameter, you can go with that. That's what creative, I mean, there are a whole bunch of people out there who teach workshops and Flash workshops, and they use prompts.
Sure. Wasn't that there's like the whole Oulipo school, right? And they're all about constraints that give rise to even more freedom and more creativity.
The Oulipo school, it was a fabulous group of mostly French writers. I don't think they have enough press. Would you please popularize them again, Becky? But I mean, there's a whole novel without the word E.
Right.
What's amazing is not just they do it, but it's a pretty good novel. There's one by Cortázar. I don't know if he properly belongs with Oulipo. Oulipo. I mean, you have excellent taste, Becky. I would say that.
I'm not saying I read them. I know.
But Hopscotch is a fairly famous novel. I know we're getting off the top of the planet, but it can be read in regular chapter sequence. But darn, you take a look at the other order he suggests: 1, 33, 2, 5, 7, and it reads like it's another novel. That's real order principle behind. But, and I guess this is another lesson for Flash or any kind of writing, it doesn't look straight. It doesn't look as if they sat down and plotted, with Venn diagrams or whatever.
Yeah, I think they had fun. That might be.
Yes, I like that. Yes.
So we have another question here. How about Flash fiction without plot and character? That's all imagery, description, musing. And I think the question is, how does that strike you as an editor? Do you like pieces like that? Do you have suggestions for pieces like that?
Sure. To my mind, that's prose poetry, which is fine, and we published it because if we have any bias, we tend a bit more toward narrative. And I've had discussions with contributing editors. I don't want to seem old-fashioned because an emphasis on plot can be that way. One, we will cheerfully break the rules for a piece that I'm trying to imitate knocked off my feet, that knocks our socks off. But yeah, that's more a prose poem, an emphasis on lyric, an emphasis on some gorgeous unfolding image. I like reading it, fine. For me, it doesn't supply some of the consolations of what I regard as flash fiction. I want to, as we put in our program statement, though maybe I should revise that way. We revise that every once in a while on the website. Doesn't have to have a conventional plot, but should move us from point A to point B, and I leave it at that.
So since you mentioned it, how would you define the difference between prose poetry and flash fiction? Is it that flash fiction has some kind of internal movement, some plot?
Now, poetry can too, but that's not the aim of the poetry. The aim is the unfolding symbol, the image, or some sort of statement that's borne out by a variety, a killer metaphor, whatever. I hesitate to say I know it when I see it because there's all sorts of intermediate grounds, and we do like language. But prose poems, that's not the purpose of it per se, I would argue. In the end, and again, I address this topic in the book, one way that you recognize poetry, because otherwise it's impossible to find, traditionally, and never mind free verse, which is certainly poetry, at least it was in lines, right? And you can play with caesura and gem and so on. The line was key. But prose poetry dispenses with that, which is an issue because now where are we? So yeah, I think it's perfectly legitimate. I love some of it. Well, as an example, Forcher's piece about the Colonel, everyone knows it. That bag of ears, the wartime atrocities. Is it a piece of flash fiction? It certainly is. Is it a prose poem? Maybe, maybe not, but it goes somewhere. So.
What are some common pitfalls that you see? It sounds like one might be just static, like beautiful imagery, static story, characters musing, nothing really happening.
Right. Again, with the added point that anything good works. I think people write too much in what I would say cliche, but they're not really cliches. They're what one writer has called word packages. So if I say extenuating, you say circumstances, because it always does that. If I say, little did he know, okay. I usually make a list for my students to say, look, you got to stop doing this. So stale language is a problem. People tend to think that way. That's not what we're looking for. A setup, okay, that doesn't really reach its full potential. Okay, what if I'm walking along the street when all of a sudden I find surprising object? That's fine, but then what do you do with it? Okay. We always like humor, by the way. We're always looking for good humor pieces, but it's got to be a little beyond an anecdote. I say that even though there's a section devoted to anecdote in the piece. Here's for example an old one. Woman when comes home and to her husband and says, "Honey, I just won the lottery. Get packing." He says, "That's great, but did you have in mind the mountains, the seaside?" She says, "I don't care. Just get packing." It's short. It's a little old-fashioned. We can change the gender and so forth. Perhaps should, but there's a story in there.
That's great. So. How do you distinguish between a story and a joke? Like, to me, that's it's lovely and it's funny, it's surprising, but it feels like a joke.
It is a joke, but on the other hand, let's get clever here and say this says volumes about their relationship, about what she has suffered until such time as she had economic independence.
Right.
Okay. what he's like, always missing the point. There's an anthology, which is, I think, is it 59 word stories? I think. Again, I have all these books on my shelves, and perhaps I should have carted them out for the interview, but I didn't want to be a bore. But there's a fairly famous one called Bedtime Story by a guy named Whitmore. And it's ingenious. It's about, I don't want to give it away, but it's basically a bedroom scenario, and after sex, out come the sort of bedroom, bed confessions. And let's just say that the guy is doing the dirty on his partner. It is not the person he's in bed with. And there is a real payback conclusion. My students love it because it's a fully developed little thriller.
Right.
So anyway.
And how, related to how things, you mentioned anecdote, that you're not seeking anecdote. So how does a piece rise above? I mean, this is true for short stories, and even narrative poetry, or even maybe in novels in some sense. Like how does something rise above? Like, that's an interesting anecdote that I tell my mom, over the phone, versus like, this is a story. This has
Again, another excellent question. Here, as with the prose poem, you can't really dope out a writer's purpose, because who knows what she had in mind, and perhaps she was wrong and it was actually a success in another direction. That said, an anecdote has a particular purpose. Okay, I amused Becky with it, or I thought I did. I thought I saw a laugh, but I wouldn't want to retell it to her. Whereas a story has elements, whether it's imagery or a certain passage that almost eludes comprehension, that makes you want to reread it, that makes you think there's an added dimension. Okay, the anecdote is one shot. Okay, I could tell more anecdotes, but I won't. I will point out, by the way, that not all anecdotes need be funny. All right, I'll tell one more, and again, it demonstrates in this case, I think, sort of the national psyche. A man finds, a man who doesn't like his neighbors particularly, finds a genie in a bottle when he's tilling some land. Uncorks the bottle. Genie says, again, trading on old stories, I'll give you 3 wishes. He says, but everything you wish, your neighbor will get twice of. Well, that's a hell of a note. But so first he wishes for all the riches in the world, be wealthy, and only to find out that his neighbor is now twice as wealthy. Then he wishes for like a big house. His neighbor has twice a big house. He can't stand this. All right. So he thinks and thinks and finally says, "Make me blind in one eye." That's not very funny.
No.
It is, quote, an anecdote. An anecdote is simply an illustrative story or tale. I have other anecdotes like that, but you see my point. It demonstrates something vicious about human nature. It's in the nature of a fable, which is certainly, a story. I'll leave it at that. Let's just say it doesn't have to be funny. But as your point, your question earlier, it's not something I would care to retell or reread or whatever. It's made its point and it moves on.
Right. Now, is that something you would want to publish? Because to me, that actually sounds like if I encountered that, I would be quite stunned by that.
Well, it is in the book. I hate to keep on saying, here's the book.
No, sure.
But my point is that for the handbook, and I was told to call it a handbook rather than a textbook, because textbook makes people scatter. It's also an anthology, and both what I've quoted are in the book. Yes, I think we would publish something like that. With the proviso, that it needn't. I've seen that kind of thing, but well, let me put it this way: we have no problem with stories that would stick in people's craws, to use an old-fashioned term. A little jolting is fine, or I can use, Professor Tuck's point about a surprise. That comes as a surprise, at least to me.
Yeah.
That you could hate your neighbor so much that you would willingly disable yourself in order to completely disable him.
Right. And I mean, it's not just an anecdote in the sense of, this is what I did today. This is a funny person that I encountered at the store today. right?
Right.
There's actually like a kind of commentary on human nature and
Sure.
history. Yeah,
So
it's interesting. So take us through your editorial process. So what happens when pieces come in? How many submissions do you get? Does everybody on the team read every submission? And do you work with writers to edit pieces or not?
yeah, sure. I take my cue from a lot of magazines, I gather, which is the submissions come over the transom through Submittable because I found it convenient, though they do take a bite. We have a reading fee simply because I believe in paying the writers. I believe in paying the staff. Pro bono work is fine, but this is real work. And the reading fee helps defray that. I'd like to disabuse people of the idea that I go, on vacation in Bermuda with it. No, we barely meet. That's the way it is. I believe in supporting art. So they pay a modest fee. They then they're in the stack, so to speak. And then every week or so, let's say we have 25 pieces. You can do the math. Our reading period is 4 months, twice a year. By now we have 1,000 submissions, which is gratifying. In any event, every week I parcel out, say, half a dozen to each reader. Contributing editors, I'd like to point out, are a lot more than readers. They make suggestions, they may solicit, they may have other good ideas, they may review or interview. We also do that. Although this is an idea I borrowed from Mark. The reviews and the interviews are no more than 500 words. Something I really like. Any event. And then the contributing editors get back to us. I'm telling Mandira nothing she doesn't know, because not only does she do this for us and an excellent job, but she also works, like a few other contributing editors, for other magazines. I don't want to imagine how busy Mandira is, but it boggles me.
There's no what is that called? Like a non-compete, like in the corporate world where you
don't know. That's a really good question. I don't think there's any poaching, really. In any event, the readers, the contributing editors get back to me, and this has to do with submittable system. I suppose you construct your own. A -1, that sounds awful. It's in orange. How about that? Is reject, which is also not a nice word. But we have a lovely rejection letter that I hope avoids some of the cliches. The editors, are not interested at this time.
Right.
Which always made me want to snap. Oh, so you like it tomorrow?
Right.
Should I resubmit? Anyway, those get the reject. Then there's a +1 in green, and those the contributing editors have suggested they really like something. Perhaps it's ready for acceptance, but whatever it is, got something striking. Those I take a long look at. Whether we accept them or not has to do with the mix and whether it really succeeds and so on. But it comes to my attention, and I pay that a lot of respect. If we don't accept it, it gets what they call an encouraging rejection letter, where I take the time to really make a specific comment, not just love your stuff, want to see more. Though at the end we say love your stuff, want to see more, and we mean it. We don't give this to that many people. We don't want to waste someone's time. And then there's the 0, which also sounds bad, where they're on the fence. There's something in the piece that appeals, but perhaps not quite. They may also get an encouraging letter. But to answer your other question about working with people, yes, we've done this. We also, by the way, really support diversity. Okay, we ask people to self-identify in their submission letters. And I have worked with all kinds of people, not too often, but if a piece is promising, I will personally email them back. Probably through Submittable. I don't want them to freak, who is this guy, David Galef at gmail.com. And say, we really like this piece, but there were some issues. Now, I want to be careful, as I'm sure a lot of you know, some people are prickly, some people don't appreciate criticism. So there's that. I can say, having been an assistant editor at other places, they may work at it and produce a worse piece. That doesn't happen that much these days, often with Flash, particularly if you're specific in your recommendations, but it can happen. So I do work with people. guardedly. And sometimes it's very gratifying. This happened a few times. The other thing is, and again, I don't mean to take any swipes at other magazines, but I've been published a fair amount, as I imagine. I mean, I know, for example, Becky, you've got a piece in Epiphany, How to Look at a Painting, which, by the way, also has a killer ending.
Oh.
My guess is that most magazines, either they accept the piece or they don't.
Mm-hmm.
I accept that, but I'm an editor. I do this in a professional capacity. We make some minor copy editing suggestions.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if there's a typo or something like that, that's sort of a no-brainer. Unless the narrator makes typos, that's part of her character. But you know, something to improve a piece. There's some worn-out language. Perhaps we could substitute a phrase. There's suggestions, but that's a type of working with the author as well.
Sure.
For what it's worth, we always back down if they, stand by their piece. Mm-hmm. But many of them are grateful because I don't know about you, but I'm not a prima donna author. I've done what I could, but anything that improves my piece, I love it.
Yeah. Same here. Yeah. When you say you get 1,000 submissions, is that per reading period or per year?
Right now, gosh, I mean, I haven't checked the queue lately, but it's about, like, say, 30 pieces per week. So if it's 4 times 30, it's probably all told for the 2, but it's increasing, which to my mind means we're doing something right. Oh, and let me plug while we're at it. We have a contest. We never went that direction before. Mark did, but I haven't. We were originally going to do a humor contest. After all, when I talked about humor, Smoke Long, I think it was Smoke Long, maybe Fractured Lip, maybe Split Lip. These are 3 magazines I admire, and many others too. So it may have been, here's an example of what our contributing editors can do. Someone said, what about a food contest? Well, heck, everybody likes food, right? So we have until, let's see, 2 months. So it's September, halfway through now, through end of October, Halloween. We are sponsoring a food writing flash fiction contest. I didn't want about one of these magazines that charges like a $20 reading fee or whatever, because I think that's daunting. So we charge what may lose us out of pocket in the long run, $7. But not only is there cash at the other end, I think I should know this, but $250, $150, whatever, but they're runners up, and the runners up get chocolate chip cookies. I thought about this. One of our editors suggested an instant ramen kit.
Yeah.
But everybody likes chocolate chip cookies, right?
Right. So. That's great. And is there a way for people to get involved with the magazine? Are you ever looking for readers or contributing editors? Is that something that rotates?
Yeah. Unfortunately, right now, we have enough contributing editors. Every time when someone steps down, and it happens, I want to keep the staff. So we send out a call. When we speak about submissions, we get a lot of job applications. Many of them quite qualified. And so it's like, well, this is good, but this is gooder, which is not a word. Don't use that. But this is goodest. Okay. And so, but then again, apropos sort of testing people out, improving things, I send them some sample stories and see what their reaction is. There's no right or wrong reaction, but if, for example, and I won't say bad taste or good taste, but if, for example, they give a 1 to stories that just aren't up our alley, down our alley, up our alley, then we're probably not a good fit. And then we accept, like 1 person, perhaps 2 out of 50 or 75 people. It is daunting, the number of people out there with experience who are trying to, earn their chops. I don't know what to say about that. It's simply the case. Right now, though, we're always happy with our staff. What unsettles the mix is when someone, leaves for whatever reason.
Right. And are you open for regular submissions right now?
Oh, one thing we do, though perhaps it makes for extra work. We're open during August. When a lot of people, I mean, I've seen this on Twitter, is there anyone around here, what magazines are open in August? I've got a piece that really needs, to be shown. We're open. And then we close November 30th. It's always 4 months. The other one starts in February, March, April, May. And then we have to scramble because we got a bunch of pieces. We don't want to wait too long. We don't want to come up, around during the Christmas holiday or any holiday. There's Hanukkah, there's Kwanzaa. So we put things to bed really quickly. Angie Kang, our art director, has a miracle turnaround. We've already got a cover. And we get it out in about 10 to 15 days. Then it's time to pay people. And then it's time to plug it. It's sort of that update of Barkley, if a tree falls in the woods with no one to hear it, doesn't make a sound. We got to publicize this. If it's not tweeted and Facebooked and Instagrammed, I don't think we've done TikTok yet. That should be our next goal. But yeah, we plug it. And the way we plug it, I mean, there are endless come-ons and they all have their merits. I believe in the writing. So Angie sketches up something loosely based on the cover. All right. And then we, usually the first line, but a beguiling 1 or 2 lines from the story. That always sucks me in. You asked what we look for in a piece. The opening and the ending are key. And then we issue them one a day on Twitter. I don't know how to solve the problem. For example, I don't remember if we did it with this Colette, who's here. Someone's got to be the last person, and that's a drag. Waiting, for like 14 days until your piece appears. But we space it out, and there are metrics, to gauge how many hits. We do pretty well.
That's great. Well, thank you so much for shedding so much light on your magazine and the genre overall. Sure. It's really interesting, and everybody should go check out the website. If you have some flash fiction pieces, get on this and submit your work. Maybe write something food related, something funny.
Hey, we always say this is a line I invented. Those before me. We are hungry for your writing. Which is true.
There you go. And you may win some chocolate chip cookies.
Yeah. Well, let me point out that no matter how stacked we are with pieces, I always look forward to seeing what's out there.
Yeah.
I think if you've gotten sort of jaded and weary, perhaps you should try some other line of work. I always look forward to that. I mean, enthusiasm, I think, is key. I love words.
Yeah.
And I love to see what people have put together with them.
Yeah, that's quite evident. Well, thank you so much, David. This was really great. And thank you everyone for coming.
Thank you very much.
Great to see you.
This was a